First of all, do not pay them. That is the absolute number one thing to do, is do not pay them, because that is why we have cybercrime, or we have ransomware attacks, because it is lucrative.
What is your top tip for businesses wanting to protect themselves against cyber attacks?
I think the absolute top tips be easy to implement and realistic. So I think number one, use a password manager. I think a lot of the breaches that we see now are commonly used passwords, or passwords that are leaked out in the internet, things like that. So that's probably the absolutely number one easiest way to prevent a breach. Another one is to be sort of vigilant on the email side. So phishing, if you're not familiar with the term phishing is a way to get people to send information, either username, password, or bank details, or whatever. If we're talking about businesses, someone gets phished, it's typically for their credentials, and then someone uses those credentials to log in and wreak havoc. There's really not an individual action item there, but it's just be skeptical of all emails, really, is as kind of the takeaway. And then I think one more also very useful tip for businesses is if everybody's using third-party services these days. Everything is subscription now. You pay monthly for just about every software we have, and there's logins everywhere. If you can enable multi-factor authentication, I guess the reason for that is if you do lose your password to somebody else, or the password is given up, with multi-factor authentication in place, even someone with that password, if they don't have that second factor of authentication, then that password is effectively useless. Yeah, like I say, there's probably more to it, but really, like I say, from a realistic, what can I do right now, what can I do tomorrow kind of thing, those are absolutely the best we can do.
In your opinion, what is the leading cause of data breaches in businesses?
Sadly, it's human beings. Humans are sort of trusting by nature. That's something that it's just ingrained into our being. So I mean, statistically factual that it's all about phishing, and the people are the weakness, basically. And the way, I mean, traditionally, before email was even was a big thing, the exploit would be something more physical, like someone says, "Oh, you walk into a front office and say, I'm late for a job interview. Can you please print my CV?" And then they give a USB stick, and they put that in, and then that's the thing that breaches it. These days, with remote working especially, that's been, so phishing is absolutely on the rise. But really, I don't want to keep leaning on phishing for every single answer. I think to answer your question more broadly, it's people are unfortunately the weakest link in any organization when it comes to data security.
What do you believe will be the next big style of cyber attack?
Ooh, the next. I think it's going to be, we're making strides in terms of things like quantum computing and sort of futuristic as our compute power gets more and more powerful, there'll be a time where our current encryption mechanisms will be rendered useless. It may not, I don't know if it's going to be the very next one, but if we look at how encryption is done today and how data is protected digitally, there's a time in the not so distant future where that's going to be, I wouldn't say obsolete, but it will be able to be broken within a reasonable amount of time by things like quantum computing, or just generally more powerful compute.
Ransomware is an increasingly worrying issue. What should businesses do if financially extorted by hackers?
First of all, do not pay them. That is the absolute number one thing to do, is do not pay them, because that is why we have cybercrime, or we have ransomware attacks, because it is lucrative. If it didn't make anyone any money, no one would actually do it. That is absolutely number one. I think number two would be figure out what the impact is. So ideally, if you've already been backing up and archiving data, then it would be an inconvenience at worst. So yeah, there's a couple of sort of reactions to this. One, if you do have backed up data, you wouldn't theoretically lose data, as in, let's say that data never becomes unencrypted. You would ideally have a backup of that. Now, the inconvenience there from the business side is that it will take time to restore that data, right? That's an outage for some period of time, which again is an inconvenience at worst. Now, the other side of it is, it depends on what data is being stolen or ransomed, because if that attacker decides they want to exploit that data, is that personal information? Is that information about your customers, or is it internal information? Not to say internal information is any more or less bad, but I guess my point is, if it's external customers, if you're, if they still logins and passwords and data, like personal data, things like that, then you as a business have an obligation to notify those people, not just under GDPR, but just even just as a respectable business, you should absolutely reach out and say, look, this is what's happened. Here's what we think they took. You need, you as an individual need to, also be vigilant. But like I said, rule number one, don't pay them.
The introduction of GDPR, how has it transformed how businesses manage people's data?
Yeah, it's really put a lot of responsibility. I mean, that was the whole point. It put a lot of responsibility on how data is handled. I think before GDPR was a thing, globally, data is sort of treated very, very casually and say, wow, we can just look at all this data. We can make money from this data. It's been a revenue stream for a lot of companies. But GDPR makes you really think about how that data is being used and shared. And from it's inconvenienced a lot of companies who weren't really looking after their data because they've had to restructure the way that they store and share that data. Asking for consent from every individual is not something that a lot of companies were used to doing. But what it's really done is it's brought a lot of responsibility and consideration into how you build infrastructure, how you protect data, which is, I think, good for everybody. It's beneficial for the whole world, businesses and individuals alike.